In 2005, in the Brazilian city of Fortaleza, a group of thieves pulled off one of the most unbelievable bank robberies in modern history. They didn't storm the building with guns. They didn't take hostages. They didn't blow open the vault door. Instead, they rented a small house 2 blocks away, pretended to run a gardening business, and spent months digging a tunnel under the streets, until they reached the vault of a bank that believed it was completely safe. On Monday morning, when the bank employees opened the vault, they found something no one expected. A hole in the floor, a dark tunnel below, and a mountain of money missing. This is the story of how they did it, what went wrong, and what it says about the people who tried to turn a tunnel into a shortcut to a new life. Fortaleza is a coastal city. Hot, busy, and full of everyday noise. Buses growl along the roads, people crowd the markets, and the sea breeze does what it can to cool the air. Like any big city, most streets aren't famous. They're just ordinary. On one of those ordinary streets, neighbors knew each other by name. Children played soccer in the road and yelled when cars came. Older people sat at their doors in the evenings watching life go by. Then one day, something new appeared. A small white house with a fresh sign. The sign advertised a gardening and landscaping business. Artificial grass, soil, turf, garden supplies. It sounded harmless enough. Soon, the front of the house matched the sign. Rolls of synthetic turf leaned against the wall. Stacks of soil and fertilizer bags were lined up neatly. A few plastic plants sat in the window to make everything look more inviting. Men in work clothes came and went, carrying clipboards, tape measures, and toolboxes. They wore simple uniforms, nothing flashy. Sometimes they loaded a truck with materials. Sometimes they unloaded. They greeted neighbors politely, nodded to kids, and bought drinks from nearby shops. To anyone passing by, this looked like a small business trying to survive in a tough economy. But behind the calm surface, something else was going on. When customers walked in, they saw a small counter, price lists, and catalogs showing green lawns and tidy yards. But there was one part of the house they never saw. Behind a plain door or a false wall, depending on how the place was arranged, there was a second room. And in that room, the wooden floor had been cut open. Beneath it, a shaft dropped straight down into the earth. There was a sturdy ladder fixed in place, here and there reinforced with metal brackets. At the top sat a small electric winch with a thick rope wound around a drum. Nearby, there were wooden beams, plastic sheets, and more coils of rope. This was not a gardening shop. This was a tunnel entrance. The gang had chosen the house for a few reasons. It was close enough to the bank that a tunnel was possible. It was far enough that no one would look at it and think bank robbery. It was on a regular, noisy street where people were used to trucks and workers coming and going. If they played their roles well, the house would be invisible in plain sight. While the neighbors talked about lawns and gardens, the men inside were thinking about distances, angles, and how many meters of ground lay between them and the bank's vault. The people involved in the heist weren't movie supervillains. They were human beings with very human problems and skills. Some had worked in construction. They knew how to shore up a trench, how to read the soil, and how to spot danger before the earth began to crack. Others had been drivers, used to long nights behind the wheel, delivering goods across cities and states. One or two were mechanics, the kind of people who could keep a generator or a fan running even when parts were old and worn. Most of them were not rich. Many had worked hard for years without feeling like they were getting ahead. That's not an excuse, but it is part of what made the plan attractive. At the center of the group was a leader. Not someone who shouted orders, but someone who could keep 10 or 20 different things moving without losing track. He knew which men could be trusted for careful work, who could lift the heaviest loads, who should handle the money later, and who should never be left alone with it. The crew shared simple rules. Work nights, rest days. Never talk about the plan outside the house. Never bring strangers into the business. If the police or anyone suspicious show up, the shop acts completely normal. They practiced their cover story until it sounded natural. If anyone asked, this was just a group of workers trying to sell artificial grass and garden supplies. But inside, when the door was closed, they talked about the real project. They measured maps. They counted the blocks between the house and the bank. They estimated soil type and depth. They worked out how to avoid water pipes, sewage lines, and foundations. They chose the tunnel route carefully. A straight line would have been easier, but not always safer. They needed just enough curve to dodge obstacles, but not so much that they missed the bank altogether. Without proper engineering tools, they relied on simple compasses and rulers, lot of manual measurements, and a surprising amount of basic geometry and common sense. And then they started digging. Their work followed a strict rhythm. During the day, the shop was open. A few men acted as staff, sweeping, arranging products, handling any real customers who wandered in. Sometimes they sold small amounts of soil or turf to keep things believable. They smiled, gave advice about lawn care, and promised future deliveries. The front door and windows showed an ordinary business. The back room showed the truth. As the sun went down and the street grew quieter, one man would lock the door, flip the sign to closed, and move to the hidden room. The crew gathered around the shaft. They wore old clothes, boots, gloves, and sometimes masks or cloths to avoid breathing too much dust. One by one, they climbed down the ladder into the dark. At the bottom, lamps hung on hooks built into the wooden beams. The light was yellow and warm, describing a narrow passage with walls reinforced by thick wood. They had built the tunnel slowly. First, they dug a short section forward. Then they lined the walls and ceiling with wooden beams to prevent collapse. They laid down plastic sheets to keep the damp soil from dripping onto them. They added simple wooden rails or smooth planks so small carts could roll more easily. Shifts were long and exhausting. Men swung pickaxes, broke up soil, filled buckets and carts, and pushed the loads back toward the shaft. There, others hoisted the earth up to the shop, where it was bagged and hidden in plain sight alongside the gardening products. Neighbors saw bag after bag going in and out and thought nothing of it. After all, what is a gardening shop supposed to move if not dirt? The deeper the tunnel went, the more dangerous the work became. Underground, air quality can quickly become a problem. The crew used a fan to push fresh air from the surface into the tunnel. The hum of that fan became part of the soundtrack of their nights. If the fan stopped, the work stopped. No arguments. They listened to the earth too. They could feel vibrations through the ground. When a bus passed above, they felt a low rumble. When a truck rolled by, the tunnel shivered slightly. These vibrations helped them estimate how close they were to busy streets and how carefully they should reinforce the structure. Every meter felt like an achievement. They measured progress on a chalkboard upstairs. We dug 3 meters tonight. We're halfway. We're under this street now. Some nights they made good progress. Other nights they hit hard rock or wet soil and had to slow down. The work was dirty, repetitive, and dangerous, but the thought of the vault kept them going. They imagined the stacks of currency, locked away where nobody was supposed to reach them. With every shovel of dirt, that impossible place felt a little closer. As the weeks passed, the tunnel grew longer and the men grew more tired. But their calculations told them something important. They were getting close. They started to recognize new sensations underground. The earth felt different when they were beneath the bank's land. The sounds changed. Sometimes they could faintly hear machinery above them. They checked their position again and again. A mistake of a few meters could mean emerging in the wrong part of the building, or missing it completely. They began to reinforce the tunnel even more. Extra beams, thicker supports under the ceiling, a smoother path for the carts so bags of money would move quickly later. They also started to plan the final operation. The heist could not happen on a random weekday. If alarms went off and staff were on site, they would have almost no time to escape. They needed a window when the bank was closed for long enough that they could work inside the vault without interruption. A weekend. They picked their time carefully, looking for a long, quiet stretch. No holidays that might bring special checks or extra security. Just a normal weekend with 2 full nights. Their plan for the final stage had several parts. Entry. Open a hole into the vault floor without triggering any obvious alarm. Timing. Work inside the vault during the night. Stop or slow down if there was unusual activity nearby. Transport. Move as much money as possible through the tunnel in bags. Exit. Leave the tunnel. house and neighborhood before Monday morning, with no one noticing anything unusual. The risk was enormous. If the vault had pressure sensors, motion detectors, or hidden alarms, they could be caught underground, trapped between a bank full of police and a city street they could not reach in time. But their observations suggested that the bank's security was more focused on doors, windows, and obvious entry points, not on someone coming through the floor from far away. So they decided to go ahead. On the chosen Friday, the bank employees followed their usual end-of-week routine. They counted cash, locked drawers, checked the vault, turned keys, and spun combination locks. Then they left, one by one, locking doors behind them and assuming that the money inside the vault would stay untouched until Monday morning. The city settled into its weekend rhythm. Restaurants, bars, and family visits. Football games on TV. Street vendors working late. At the small white house with the fake gardening shop, something very different was happening. The crew gathered for what they all knew would be the most important job of their lives. They made final checks, headlamps and lanterns ready, ropes and pulleys in working order, extra tools in case something broke, bags and sacks prepared for the cash. They reviewed their roles. A small team would be inside the vault, lifting money and filling bags. Others would stay in the tunnel, moving bags along. At the shaft, a couple of men would work the winch and rope. In the shop, men would stack bags and prepare them for loading into vehicles. Then they went down. Near the end of the tunnel, the earth above their heads was not very thick. Above them was the vault floor, solid, cold, and silent. They marked a square on the roof of their tunnel, right where they believed the vault's concrete slab lay. The first blows were careful and quiet. They didn't swing wildly. They scraped, chipped, and drilled slowly, feeling with their hands. They didn't want to crack the floor in a way that would be heard or seen too early. Finally, after hours of work, a small opening broke through. Air from the vault drifted down. It smelled slightly different. A mix of paper, steel, and the faint cold of air conditioning. One man pushed his head up and looked around. He probably saw shelves, steel walls, and stacks of cash wrapped in straps. No one shouted. They couldn't afford noise. Inside, they moved like workers who had done this 100 times in their minds. They widened the hole just enough to climb through. Then the real extraction began. Bag after bag was filled with currency. Inside the vault, the men worked quickly but methodically, lifting, stacking, and loading money into sacks. They didn't have time to count everything precisely. Their goal was simple: take as much as possible as fast as possible. Each full bag was clipped onto a hook, lowered into the hole, and moved along the tunnel by the crew below. The train of bags moved like a silent conveyor belt through the underground passage. At the shaft, the winch whined as it pulled up each heavy load. In the shop, the bags were stacked in corners, hidden from the windows. Outside, a passing neighbor might have seen nothing but a quiet building with its lights on late. The work continued deep into the night and likely into the next day. The men took short breaks to drink water, wipe sweat from their faces, and stretch aching muscles. Their hands burned from rope and rough fabric. Their backs screamed from lifting. But the sight of those bags filling up the room above the tunnel must have been a rush unlike anything they had ever experienced. At some point, they had to make a decision. When to stop. It's tempting to take more and more, but every extra minute increases the chance that someone will notice something strange. A sound, a vehicle, a light. Eventually, they decided they had enough or knew they had to leave whether they were satisfied or not. They climbed back down, sealed what they could, and slowly made their way out of the tunnel. They cleaned the shop as best they could, removed obvious tools, and prepared to leave. Vehicles, chosen carefully to blend into the neighborhood, were loaded and driven away. By the time Sunday night turned into Monday morning, the tunnel was quiet, the fake shop was almost empty, and the vault above the tunnel held a new echo where money used to be. For the bank staff, Monday began like every other day. Employees arrived, greeted each other, and settled into their routines. Vault staff went through their checklists, using keys and codes to unlock what was supposed to be the safest room in the building. When the heavy vault door opened, nothing looked strange at first glance. Shelves, boxes, bundles, But then someone noticed something wrong. A section of the shelves looked emptier than it should. A stack of cash was missing. At first, people might have assumed a mistake in records, a miscount, or an earlier movement of funds. Then someone stepped farther in and felt something odd. A hollow sound beneath their feet. They looked down and saw it. A square cut into the concrete floor. In the middle of the vault. A hole. The alarm went up, this time not from machines but from human voices. Managers were called. Security arrived. The police were notified quickly. Someone brought a flashlight, knelt at the edge, and shined the beam downward. What they saw was like something out of a movie. A long tunnel, stretching away into the darkness, lined with beams and plastic. The realization was huge and immediate. This was not a quick, random theft. This had taken months of planning and work. Someone had been beneath them all that time, digging toward this very room. News traveled fast through the city and then the country. Television crews rushed to capture footage. The vault, the hole, the tunnel. Reporters tried to explain how such a thing could happen. Soon, investigators followed the tunnel to its other end. They surfaced in the little white house that had promised lawns and tidy gardens. The gardening shop was now something very different in their eyes. Behind the public area, they found the shaft, the winch and rope, muddy stains and marks left behind, and signs that the place had been used as a cover, not a real business. The scale of the operation impressed even the police. The tunnel had been long, reinforced, and equipped with lighting and ventilation. It was a crime, yes, but also an example of organization and persistence. The big question remained, how much did they take? Estimates varied. Counting was complicated because money had been moved, restacked, and partially disturbed. But everyone agreed on one thing. It was an enormous sum, equal to many years of normal work for any of the men who had dug the tunnel. From the outside, the investigation looked quiet. No dramatic car chases, no big shootouts. Mostly, it looked like people sitting at desks making phone calls, staring at documents. But behind that calm surface, investigators were racing against time. They started with the basics. Who rented the house? Who registered the business? Who installed the sign? How long had the shop been there? They interviewed neighbors. Did you notice anything strange? Were there late-night deliveries? Did you ever hear noise at odd hours? Do you remember license plates of trucks or cars? Most neighbors said what neighbors always say after a cleverly hidden crime. The people seemed normal. They were quiet, polite. We didn't suspect anything. Investigators checked hardware stores and supply shops. The tunnel showed signs of certain types of beams, specific plastic sheeting, particular kinds of rope and fans. If someone had bought large quantities of those materials within a certain time window, that was a lead. Banks provided account information. Phone companies provided call records. Police looked for patterns. Numbers that kept repeating, people who called each other too often around key dates, cash purchases that didn't match normal income. The money itself also told a story. When a huge amount of cash enters a city's underground economy, it leaves traces. New cars paid in full with money, not financing. Houses renovated quickly. Businesses receiving unusual amounts of cash. People who had been barely getting by suddenly spending on luxury items. Investigators compared income and expenses. If someone officially earned very little but appeared to be living big, that was suspicious. They made arrests starting at the edges. A driver who claimed he just helped move some bags, but could not explain why he was paid so much. A cousin who admitted he had introduced someone to a landlord for the rental of the house. One or two people who cracked under pressure and gave up names, hoping for lighter sentences. Every weak link in the circle around the heist helped the police get closer to the core team. Meanwhile, some of the money was found hidden in strange places. Inside walls, buried in yards, stuffed in plastic containers, or stashed under floors. Some of it was already damaged by moisture and time. Some was crisp and new, waiting to be spent. Yet, even with all this effort, not all of the stolen funds were recovered. Part of the fortune simply vanished. Spent, hidden, or moved in ways that could never be fully traced. From a distance, Heists like this can look impressive, even glamorous. It's easy to focus on the clever planning and the boldness of the execution. But the closer you look, the more you see the cost. For the men who tunneled under the city, the money did not bring simple happiness. While they were digging, the goal felt clean and sharp. Reach the vault, get the cash, change their lives. They worked like miners, sweating in the heat, breathing dust and fear, all for a chance at a different future. Once they had the money, everything got complicated. Sudden wealth is hard to hide. It changes how people act, speak, and move. It brings tension into families. A spouse asks, "Where is this money really from?" Children notice new things appearing in the house. Friends wonder how someone's life turned around so fast. Inside the crew, trust often begins to break. Jealousy grows. Who got more? Who might talk if they get scared? Who might try to keep a bigger share? The men had escaped the vault, but they had not escaped fear. Now, instead of fearing a tunnel collapse, they feared the knock on the door in the middle of the night. For those who were caught, the price was clear: trials, sentences, and years in prison. For their families, the price was different: shame, broken plans, and futures shaped by a decision they didn't make. The bank repaired its vault. The hole in the floor was sealed. New security measures were put in place. The small White House changed again. New paint, a new sign, a new tenant who had nothing to do with fake grass or tunnels. The tunnel itself was filled. The earth reclaimed the empty space as it always does. But the story remained. Why does a story like this stay in people's minds long after the news cameras leave? Partly because it feels unreal. A fake garden shop, a long tunnel, a hole in a vault floor. It sounds like something invented for a movie, yet it happened in real life. It also challenges our usual way of thinking about crime. Most people imagine bank robberies as loud, fast events. Alarms blaring, armed men shouting, customers screaming. This heist was the opposite. Slow, quiet, patient. It took months of planning and hard, dirty, manual labor, careful organization and discipline. People who could have used those skills to build houses, roads, or businesses. That contradiction fascinates us. Talent used for something illegal instead of something the world would openly admire. There's also a deeper question. What drives someone to spend months underground chasing money that isn't theirs? For some, it might be greed. For others, a belief, right or wrong, that legal paths will never give them a chance at the life they want. None of that makes the crime okay. But it reminds us that behind every daring heist, there are human stories, not just headlines. The city of Fortaleza continued to live its life. People still went to work and to school. The sea still rolled in and out, as it always had. Buses still rumbled over streets that, for a time, had hidden a secret river of dirt and sweat beneath them. The ground remembers what happened, even if buildings change and people move on. In the end, the tunnel under Fortaleza wasn't just a hole in the earth. It was a path from frustration to temptation, from patience to risk, from sudden wealth to long consequences. For a weekend, it connected a fake gardening shop to a bank vault full of money. For years afterward, it connected a city's ordinary streets to a story that still makes people shake their heads and say, "I can't believe they actually did that." The tunnel under Fortaleza has been filled in. The house has new paint. The bank has a new floor. But the story still lives on because it asks a simple, uncomfortable question. When the system feels unfair, how far will some people go to change their fate in a single weekend? Do you feel any sympathy for the crew that spent months digging? Or do you think this kind of crime can never be justified, no matter the reason? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read everyone. You're watching Captain Justice True Stories. If the story kept you listening to the end, tap like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more real cases that are almost too wild to believe.